Welcome. I am Meg Smith, CEO of Cure Alzheimer's Fund. Thank you for joining us today to hear about how we are advancing the fight against Alzheimer's disease. Cure Alzheimer's Fund has one mission: to fund research with the highest probability of preventing, slowing, or reversing Alzheimer's disease. Since 2004, we have deployed more than $210 million toward extraordinary research to end the terrible burden of this disease. Active researchers from a wide range of scientific specialties who are at the forefront of discovery guide our funding while also pursuing their own breakthrough projects with our support. At Cure-Alz, we focus only on making bold bets to generate knowledge that will help the entire Alzheimer's community. We do not pursue profits or financial returns. We can provide this support to the most innovative ideas across biomedical science, prioritizing new, neglected, and unfunded questions, fundamental to understanding what causes and contributes to Alzheimer's, only because of the generosity of our donors. Our board of directors, trustees, and certain other supporters cover all of our operating costs. This generosity and vision mean that 100% of the gifts from our other wonderful donors go directly to our research program. We are grateful for the community of generous donors who make these scientific advances possible, and I am glad to share some of them with you today. After watching, I hope you feel as I do: incredible resolve to find a cure for everyone touched by this terrible disease.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present my work here, at least part of my work in the field of dementia, in this very nice, I would say, digital though environment. Before I go into the actual research that I'm doing, I think it could be nice to very briefly also introduce why I came to do what I do. And this is obviously something that has triggered me from the beginning in med school already, the brain function, and especially how that brain function relates to the blood that's going through the brain as the major source, of course, of nutrition and oxygen. And that actually during my med school and also during my PhD trajectory was always at the core of the work I was doing. I fully left clinical work to do full-time research. That was a difficult choice, but on the other hand, I was also very happy that I was able to, as of course, you probably all know that the realm of research is much more challenging than the realm of clinical work, and I'm very happy that I was able to grow into that direction and come to the place where I'm currently at. So as you see, my major interest is, of course, in targeting brain arteries or brain circulation as a major target to ultimately combat, hopefully also be able to prevent dementia. And before I go into that, a very brief introduction. So probably most of you will know this person. This is Alois Alzheimer. And on the upper right corner is his lab in Munich, Germany. And in the lower on the lower side of the image is actually one of his first publications about a disease that was later called Alzheimer's disease or Alzheimer's dementia. And the interesting thing is that already in this paper or in this manuscript that he wrote that the brain of this diseased patient actually showed signs of arteriosclerosis, so vascular disease, cerebrovascular arterial disease, in combination with the amyloid deposition, so protein plaques, as he called them back then, if I'm not mistaken. So already in that very early stage, at first sight of the disease, vascular disease was already mentioned as potential, or at least being present also in the brain of patients with this peculiar type of disease back then. Well, I'm not going to do a whole course of history, but I think that the whole aspect of vascular disease as a cause of dementia or as a determinant or risk factor of dementia has not been investigated as thoroughly over the past decades as, for example, amyloid deposition have been investigated. Of course, there's also a reason or partly reason for that. That is, of course, that the amyloid or the is an attractive target for industry and for pharmacy to try to tackle and see if dementia resolves. But unfortunately, at this moment, there's no cure still left. So when we have a look at the brain, it is quite interesting to see how many blood vessels are actually going through the brain. And if you would take out all these blood pressures and tie them to each other, you would have over 600 kilometers of blood vessels that are in the brain. That is a huge amount, which is larger than any other organ in the body. And this is of course more an artist impression, but here you see also the complexity of the arterial system. And an important thing to realize there is that each minute 750 to 1000 milliliters of blood is going through the brain. This is if you think about this, this is an enormous amount. And approximately 45 to 50 milliliter of oxygen is needed for adequate brain function. These are extremely high numbers, like 1000 milliliter of blood each minute going through the brain. So you can imagine that if anything is wrong with these blood vessels, or this blood is unable to reach all the areas that should be reached, that problems may occur. And of course, the most prominent problems, to take a little sidestep, is if we have vessels that start to occlude due to the process of atherosclerosis, right, buildup of lipids, calcifications, etc., in the vessel wall that limit the blood flow, ultimately may even occlude the blood vessel and cause acute ischemic stroke, right? This is one of the best or most well-known consequences of atherosclerotic disease, a stroke in the brain or a myocardial infarction if this happens in the coronary arteries in the heart. And you can, of course, very well imagine that this a very acute event, right? That there is a sudden stop in the blood flow at a certain location. So the tissue is at risk of dying ultimately, but in that period, it simply gets not sufficient amount of oxygen, which causes the symptoms, as highlighted here as well by an advertisement of the American Stroke Association. Now, my take on that is, of course, these are the acute events following it, but not always is this type of vascular disease, so the atherosclerotic disease, causing these acute events. It may be present and it may impact or impede the blood flow through the arteries of the brain, but not fully occlude the vessel, so no stroke will become apparent, so to say. But still, if you see this from a chronic perspective, so to say, there's a chronic change in the amount of blood that's going through the brain, but also thereby the amount of nutrients, oxygen, etc. So maybe we should also look beyond the acute consequences of this type of vascular disease, atherosclerosis, and also look at what could be the chronic consequences. And then you suddenly step into the realm of brain function, brain atrophy, ultimately perhaps even dementia. Now, before I go further into that, I would like to very briefly highlight again, and probably many of these are known to you as well, what are actually the risk factors of getting atherosclerotic disease? And this is, I think, very well known, especially in the US, ad by the American Heart Association, Life's Essential 8, where they very nicely highlight the 8 major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Well, these are obviously the risk factors for atherosclerosis. So very, very common ones, smoking, high blood lipids, so hypercholesterolemia, overweight or obesity, I should say, diabetes, high blood pressure, low physical activity, and a bad lifestyle in the sense of food intake, and sleep. Now, I will come back to these risk factors in a bit because there is a very, very substantial link between these risk factors and the risk factors that have been identified for dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Now, what have I been doing over the past close to a decade now is trying to visualize the vascular disease in vivo. So in persons that are still alive, still participating in the community. So population-based data, trying to collect population-based data. So trying to collect images of people that are still what we say community dwelling, so not symptomatic, so no patients. I'm looking into persons that are still healthy in the sense that they don't have clinically overt dementia or other cardiovascular diseases. And to do that, I've been using the infrastructure of a large population-based study that we have here in the Netherlands called the Rotterdam study. And I've been inviting people, close to 2,500 people, to undergo a CT scan of the skull, so a CT scan of the head, I should say. Now, what did I do on these CT scans is actually have a look at the major arteries that supply blood to the brain. So those are the carotid arteries in the neck and the vertebrobasilar arteries in the posterior location. And what you can see here is an example of a CT slice at the level of the blue line in the brain, where you can see here circular white configurations. In the animation on the right side, it's clearly highlighted in red. And these calcifications, what these are calcifications of the internal carotid artery. So the major artery supplying blood to the brain. So this is the one coming from the neck, going into the brain. And obviously these shouldn't be there, these calcifications, because calcification is one of the hallmarks of atherosclerotic disease. And this is an example where you can see on both sides, both left and right, that these calcifications are present. Now, this is simply one example, and I won't be showing many graphs or many results today in terms of numbers, but there's one figure I would like to show, because this is the figure of the total study population that I studied. So in total, 2,500 people from the age of 60 years onwards, and simply showing the occurrence of any of this calcification in the brain. And as you can see, that prevalence of the occurrence rate is very high. So close to 90% of all people have, at the age of 80 or over, any form of this calcification. And that can be one single, let me say, spot of calcification, but it could also be an example that I just show you. So in that sense, it's very important to realize that this is a very, very highly prevalent condition, which has major consequences at later age. What is also notable here is that the dark blue and the lighter blue represent men and women. And in contrast to what we know for coronary disease, where there is a very substantial difference between men and women, in the brain arteries, we don't see that difference, which is very surprising in itself and has also become a separate research line of that we are studying in my team to see why is that gender difference so obvious in other arteries and not in the cerebral arteries. But I won't go into detail today on that. Okay, so I've already been linking it a bit to more chronic conditions. So on the left side here again we see a cross section of the brain from the frontal side. On the left side is a healthy brain, and on the right side is a brain with a lot of brain atrophy, tissue loss, and what you could say a very clear example of how a brain with Alzheimer's disease in the later stages will look like. So there's a substantial loss of actual brain tissue. And now what we have shown with our work is that people with brain artery calcification have up to an 80% higher chance to develop dementia, including Alzheimer's dementia, than people without those calcifications. Of course, that still doesn't say that if you have these calcifications, you will get dementia, but at least we see that there's a much higher risk for these people. And what we also saw is not that only present or absent, but that there's a dose-response relationship. So the more calcification in terms of volume, the higher the risk. Now, I told you that I would come back to risk factors because as for stroke and cardiovascular disease, risk factors for dementia have also been identified, and I'm showing them here. Physical inactivity, smoking, alcohol consumption. I'm not going through all of these, but less education makes a lot of sense, of course. But also, again, hypertension, diabetes, depression, and obesity. Now, if I put these two next to each other, you see there's quite an overlap, quite a substantial overlap of the major risk factors for clinical cardiovascular disease on the left side, like stroke and myocardial infarction, and clinically overt dementia, like including Alzheimer's disease. So my central hypothesis during all these years of work is that the underlying mechanism of these risk factors, may it not be atherosclerosis, so may it not be the disease of the cerebral arteries that contributes greatly to dementia as well. Now, and with help, and I told you I wouldn't be showing too many figures and numbers, but I have to show a couple. With help of the Cure Alzheimer's Fund, we have been further diving into this. And the one that is, I think, very relevant is is the paper that I'm showing here, namely that we did not find any association between the presence of intracranial, so arteriosclerosis of the cerebral arteries, with deposition of cerebral amyloid in the brain, which is, I think, a very important finding, because that means that these two pathways, so to say, or these two risk factors may operate independently of each other, contributing both to dementia. Because what we show, of course, as well, is that the calcification in the cerebral arteries is very much linked to a worse cognitive performance over time. Here you see those kind of, well, we call them growth curves for babies, but we have developed these percentile curves now, cognitive performance. And you see that the green line is the lowest 5% of calcification in the cerebral arteries, and these are in the left column the carotids, and on the right column the posterior arteries, but that is not so important now. But it's clear that if you are in the 95th percentile, you see that it's substantially worse. The cognition is substantially worse than for the people in the lower percentiles. And the final finding, also published in one of the major journals in the field of Alzheimer, perhaps the major journal, was our ultimate finding that indeed intracranial arteriosclerosis, so arteriosclerosis of the cerebral arteries, is associated and increases the risk of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. And what I would like to stress here, of course, is that we took care of the people in the analysis. We took care, of course, of people that suffered a stroke before they got the diagnosis of dementia. Otherwise, it could also be that the stroke or the damage done to the brain due to the stroke cause dementia, like vascular dementia, but we really only focused on the people without any other clinical symptoms, and we follow them for over 20 years, close to 20 years. And that is, I think, the most powerful evidence that we can generate, at least in the current era, to show that a certain determinant or a certain risk factor is associated with an outcome, in this case, dementia. Of course, I'm not doing this work by myself. I work a lot with other larger studies, clinical studies, population-based studies. On the left side is my own team with postdocs and PhD students all working on this in this field. And with that, I would very much like to thank you for the attention.
I hope you enjoyed this presentation of some of the cutting-edge research that Cure Alzheimer's Fund supports. I invite you to find a wealth of additional information on our website, curealz.org. Thank you for spending this time with us to hear about the science and progress that will bring an end to Alzheimer's. Please be in touch should you have any questions about the science we fund or how you can be part of the solution.